and he thought that the epilepsy was getting worse. And in this delusional state, he had convinced himself that he should take his life. Now, this was such a departure from his normal behavior that the prosecution didn't even press charges for him, like the others. And that's why in this case here with Lindsay Clancy, I'm just like, prosecution, you guys have to just get a life. Like, there's no motive here. I don't know why you want to drag her through all of this, but the onus is on us, just as, as a public health matter, that when these things happen, we actually need to ask these questions. Is there an alternative explanation for this? Is there a motive going on here? Or is this just someone who was seemingly fine one day, and now we have this paper trail in the medical records of him getting on more and more medications and it causing mood instability, and eventually this catastrophe is happening. So I do think drug-induced homicide happens a lot more than people realize.
So is that a actual listed side effect, homicidal thoughts or impulses to a number of psych meds? I know suicidal ideation can be, but is homicidal acts a known, side effect of some of these meds?
So in some of the labels, it is. For instance, Abilify, which is an antipsychotic medication that can make people very restless and irritable, that one has homicidal ideation in the label. I'm not aware of any drug that actually has like homicide, homicidal acts there. But there's a lot of
it takes intention, or it takes actually the act of the will in the end.
Yeah.
So they can't say that. Yeah.
But it's also like a crazy thing to put in a drug label. Side effects may include homicidal behavior. I think people would be like, okay, we got to think about another way of saying this. But the proxies are all there. For instance, like if you look at any of those heavy stimulant medications, aggression and hostility are in the warnings and precautions. If you look at the SSRIs, it's agitation, I think aggression, irritability. And so, read between the lines, people. Like if you're seeing drugs that are pushing people towards violence or agitation, in the right circumstances, with the right person, with guns nearby or a knife or something, that will spill over into homicidal behavior. I mean, the SSRIs, that the boxed warning is for suicidal behavior. Is suicidal behavior, like drug-induced suicidal behavior, is that really that different from homicide? Yes,
right.
It is, but in some ways it isn't. We're still talking about impulsive behavior that's disconnected from consequence, because that's what it is. When we have a drug-induced suicidal behavior, you wouldn't have done that in your right mind. That's been kind of facilitated. And those same drug actions can play out towards violence as well.
So do you think that in retrospect, if you were advising the Clancy family, would you have told Patrick Clancy, do not under any condition leave your wife alone with the children?
If I was aware that she was having homicidal thoughts towards the kids, and this is the interesting thing, because I think she actually told him that, and he may have not fully taken that seriously, because and I can sympathize with that maybe a little bit. How could this ever be real? That something like that would happen. But if I had known that, that's the time where I say, okay, this is getting pretty serious. We have to bring you into a hospital. We're going to monitor you. We're going to get you off all of these medications, and we're just going to wait for these drugs to get out of your system, because it's looking like drug-induced worsening. It's also looking like something really bad could happen. And so that would have stopped us, stop the medications, bring us somewhere safe, and just let the drugs metabolize out of her system. And that would have prevented this.
There are tons of people, of course, weighing in. It's a highly publicized trial. There is thousands of people actually right now, Dr. Joseph, that are accusing Patrick, the dad, the husband, of not just negligence, but some who are saying that he set her up, and that this was done by him allegedly because he, the fact that she had no motive, and then she doesn't remember, doing it. And that the memories may have been planted by him, and she was found outside. She was cold, less than, I think, 82 or something like this degrees. And so the time frame doesn't make sense. Again, these are arguments from, internet sleuths. Have you seen any of that? Do you have a take on any of that?
Yeah, I think it's I think it's wrong, and I don't, I don't think Patrick Clancy did any of this. From everything that I've seen in the medical records and from, what Lindsay has also been telling her attorneys and what they're putting forward in their malpractice case is that he was there advocating for her, desperately trying to get her help. And I think, when you have a case like this where it's like there's no motive going on, people want to invent something. And, usually it's the spouse, if you're going to invent something. But what I see is that we have a much more plausible alternative explanation there, which is it was drug induced. And, and, and that Lindsay actually did this. And she did it under the influence of the medications, having a serious mental health crisis. So, I think it's interesting. I think cases like this will kind of invite that sort of speculation, but I don't think it's valid. I think there's something more obvious going on.
So you mentioned, if things had played out the way that were more ideal to have a better outcome for the sake of these babies whose lives were taken so horribly, she would have been institutionalized, in your view, weaned off of the meds, the psych meds, and then given holistic treatments. Is that the case? Is that your view? And what are these holistic treatments that you would have recommended if she had been in your care?
So a lot of it is simple stuff. So, we look at postpartum depression. Like, let's talk about that. So, I mean, we're talking about hormonal problems. Yeah. I think a lot of women can relate to that, but a lot of it is also problems going on in life. It's really hard to have two children and then to welcome a third. It's very hard to be dealing with extra weight if you're weight conscious. It's very hard to have to deal with, a career that, you've put on hold as well, and to have mixed feelings about that. Also, women, when they are looking after young children, especially nowadays, we do it in isolation when we're not by our families. Our spouse may be away a lot of the time. Our sleep schedule becomes completely ruined. Most people aren't getting out, getting in the sunshine. It's interesting that this crisis really came to a front going into the winter months as well, when you're not outside and when you're not moving as much. And so we look at a lot of these holistic treatments as, that's just complementary and alternative stuff that, we got to bring out the big guns for the real depression. That stuff doesn't work. And that's just not true. This is just a myth from the pharmaceutical industry. Like, getting people surrounded by people that they love and trust, getting people the right amount of support if they're looking after kids, talking to a therapist about just practical ways of, okay, so what does this mean for your work? When are you going to return to work? How do you feel about that? How do you feel about, being a mother? Helping people get back on a normal rhythm with the sun and daylight. These things can be hugely important. And so if the medications are now off the table, because every time you try them, they make it worse. It's not like, hey, what do? We don't know what to do. There's so many things that you can do. You bring in family members, you rally support, you get people there. I mean, they had two sets of parents, Patrick's parents and Lindsay's parents, who loved them and cared for them. We can rally resources around to help people through these crises. And so that's what I would have done. I would have lent heavily on what we know to be true for just helping people through anxiety and depression. It's boring stuff, but it works powerfully.
If a juror were to ask you, Dr. Joseph, was Lindsay Clancy in control of her actions that night, what would you tell them?
She was not in control of her actions that night. And here is why. So whenever I look at whether a drug has caused someone to become, aggressive, I have to think about what is the alternative explanation if it's not the drug. And so there's no motive here. And so, there's no affair going on in the background. There's no prior history of violence. She's not using drugs. You have a whole line of people lining up saying that she's a wonderful mother who cared for them. And the father of the children, the father who lost his 3 children, is standing by her just saying, I have no idea what happened except for the drugs. And so that's the first thing, there is no other alternative explanation for this. And then on top of that, Now we actually have a medical record that clearly shows someone deteriorating over time in from multiple different doctors when these drugs are making them worse. And so, okay, so we have a medical record that supports drug-induced worsening. And then we also have precedent here. And so precedent is when you look at similar cases where this has happened. For instance, David Carmichael, this man in Canada, the one who killed his son, and the prosecution just left it alone because it was so unusual. You can develop, and we know this to already happen. You can develop these psychotic, fever dream, delusional thoughts from these medications that can make you do things that you never would do. And we've seen this time and time again across multiple different cases. And so, yes, no alternative explanation, clear track, clear signs in the medical record. And then we also have multiple similar cases. I put all of that together and I say, this was someone who wasn't in her right mind at the time. This was drug-induced. This was a drug-induced murder. She did not know right from wrong when she was doing it, and that's why I think she should be found not guilty.
You've mentioned a number of the psych meds she was on, a number of the side effects of things like SSRIs, et cetera. But to your knowledge, what would you say, in your professional opinion, were the exact medications that created her psychosis, where she was out of control of her actions?
So again, this is just me on the sidelines. Mm-hmm. I think it began with the Zoloft at the beginning. And the reason is she gets on the Zoloft, immediately develops insomnia. She goes higher on the dose. That makes it worse. Another doctor gives her Prozac a couple of weeks later. That makes her worse as well. And so there's a lot of women out there, and just people in general, they just have very negative initial reactions to these drugs. And sometimes that just sensitizes the nervous system. And so that's what I think happened there. It's almost like you've taken a hit to the head, because everything they try after that doesn't really help her that much. I mean, she gets put on hundreds of milligrams of Seroquel, which is an antipsychotic, and it still doesn't help her. It's still making her feel worse. And so I think the SSRIs at the start destabilize her. Now, when we get to the end, right before, this is like 3 to 4 months later, there's two things that happen right before she takes the lives of her children and then seriously harms herself. She's in benzodiazepine withdrawal. We saw from the toxicology expert that she had low levels of the benzodiazepine metabolites in her system. So she was subtherapeutic. And that makes sense because I think it's around 14 days before the kids, before the incident happens, she's in a psychiatric hospital and she's wanting to come off the benzos, and the doctor gives her a 14-day taper. That's pretty fast for someone who's been on these meds for 2 to 3 months, because that's what she was on. And so when you're coming off a strong sedative like Xanax or Klonopin, you develop anxiety, you develop insomnia, you become more unstable. So that's happening in the background. And then right before this happens, she's put on a drug called amitriptyline. And so this is another drug, another antidepressant, not exactly the same as the ones she negatively reacted to before, but still similar mechanism of action in there. She gets put on 10 of amitriptyline, and then the day before the murders, the kids die, the dose is doubled. And so what I think happened is she's in some benzo withdrawal, and then she gets re-exposed to another drug that revs her up, makes her worse, and that's what leads to the psychosis. That's what the medical notes seem to suggest to me.
Is it possible to be in postpartum psychosis, unmedicated, and be prompted to do violent action? So separate from this is the cause, it's caused by the drugs, you can be prompted to violence or aggression being unmedicated in postpartum psychosis.
It's theoretically possible, yes. Yeah.
Have you seen that or heard of those cases?
Personally, I have not seen it, but so if you just think about psychosis, whether it's postpartum psychosis or schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, when you lose touch with reality and you're having paranoia and delusions and you start to feel like maybe the government's after me, people are out to get me, you can get in such a fearful, confused state that you can do things that are completely out of character for you. And so it's certainly possible. people have become very violent when they've been in psychosis in the past, and we just know that to be true. So it can happen independently of medication as well.
I think your number was 20% of moms are on psych meds. I was talking about a third of them. It wasn't just psych meds. It was other kind of meds too. What is the right number according to your knowledge? Is it 20% of all mothers are on actual psychiatric medications?
I think going back to 2015, the number was 18%. And that's pre-COVID. And so everything bumped up about 10 to 15% after COVID. So I would say conservatively, 20% of American women take antidepressants. Now, this isn't lumping in benzos, antipsychotics, ADHD medications. And so I would say if I were to guess, you're looking at anywhere from around probably 25 to maybe even 30% of American women being on a psychiatric medication. That the number gets higher the older they are. We've got data from, I think it's 2019, that shows that if you are over age 60 and you're a woman, 1 in 3 of them are taking a psychiatric medication now. So the numbers are staggeringly high.
Summer is winding down and school is around the corner, which means healthy routines are essential. For our family, that means GoodRanchers.com meat delivered to our door every month, easy peasy. Good Ranchers partners with local farmers and ranchers for 100% American meat, pasture raised, no antibiotics, no added hormones ever, and best of all, it's delicious. Whether you get the chicken, my favorite, it's juicy and tender, or the pork, the beef, the steaks are amazing, or fish. There's also seed oil-free chicken nuggets for the kids. Right now, if you go to goodranchers.com/Lila, you can start your plan and get $50 off plus free bonus meat with every single order. That's goodranchers.com/Lila, valid for this month only. Goodranchers.com, American meat delivered. Whether you like it or not, your current healthcare dollars are likely supporting procedures that you and I don't agree with, from abortion to gender reassignments and more. But with our partner, Presidio Healthcare, you can get the country's first pro-life Christian healthcare network. This is not crowd sharing, but real comprehensive health insurance. Right now, if you're in Texas, visit presidiocare.com/Lila to get your quote today. And stay tuned as Presidio is looking to expand to Florida, Indiana, Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, and more states. Help bring life-affirming healthcare to the rest of the country. Visit presidiocare.com/Lila to get started today. That's presidiocare.com/Lila. Obviously, I know you're very critical of the pharmaceutical industry and of the medical system overprescribing, but why do you think there is such a need, or a felt need, I should say, by patients who are obviously going to their doctors saying, I'm struggling, and then the doctors are choosing to prescribe psychiatric meds?
I think we are in a general health and mental health crisis right now. And if I was going to go down like the tier list of the things that I think are playing the biggest roles, I think our physical health is very poor. I actually think a lot of mental health problems are physical health problems. And I think they play out in painful periods, PCOS, hormonal problems, migraines, like a lot of things we don't like. A lot of those problems go along with mental health symptoms, and then they kind of get split up, but just people in general feel terrible. Where's that coming from? Well, it's coming from the fact that we are not living in alignment with how we're designed. Most Americans are walking 4,000 steps a day. That's crazy. You know, we used to walk 20,000 steps a day. We used to move our body. That's anti-inflammatory. It helps us keep our weight off. 70% of our country is overweight. 30% of them are obese. When you're carrying around that much extra weight, that's all inflammatory as well. That's metabolically active tissue that is just causing inflammation as well. We also sit around screens all day. We spend limited time outside. We evolved to be in the sun. We evolved to be outside. And if we just sit in these boxes all day and we're not in the sun, our mood is also wrecked. Our sleep is poorer than it's ever been before. We also have some very interesting values that have changed. We really value, especially, and I'm from Australia, and so I'm used to something more laid back. And when I come to the US, I'm just like, it's just like, who are you? What do you do? And And so we also have these really fragmented communities where, the husband or the wife, that we just travel for work. And so we're not with our childhood friends, we're not with our parents, we're not with our communities. We're always going for this next employment opportunity. And so we end up living also like very isolated lives in communities with people that we often don't share values with as well. And so there's just these multiple different layers going on that are making people physically sick and having mental health symptoms and also psychologically unwell. And then if you want to layer another layer on top of this, it's once you get on these drugs, many doctors don't know how to get people off them. So you might get on them because you travel, you moved town and you got depressed, or you went through a divorce and you don't need it anymore. But then the doctor says, oh, well, you just come off over a couple of months and it's way too fast. And instead of them recognizing it's withdrawal, they say, oh, you've got this genetic illness, major depressive disorder, and now you need to, and that was proof because when we tried to lower it, you had those symptoms and now you need to stay on it forever. So there's also this like once you get on, like you can't come off type of thing. And from surveys, we know that happens in around, I think it's around 30% of people who want to come off the medications aren't able to because of the withdrawal symptoms. And so it's also just this number that just kind of keeps on building up over time. And and so we get these crazy high numbers like that when this has been going, we've been prescribing these drugs like crazy for the last 3 decades.
It's so wild. It's, I mean, and the consequences for relationships. I mean, obviously the worst possible outcome is murdering your own family. I mean, it's beyond horrific, but the other consequences is just broken down relationships because people are just struggling to function in connection with each other. So if someone is listening who knows a new mom or they are a new mom, and they're feeling the baby blues, this person, having had this baby and they're not, sure what to do. They're talking to their doctor and their doctor is recommending a psychiatric medication. What further questions should this mom ask before she agrees to take a prescribed psychiatric medication?
Yeah. So the first thing is that the Lindsay Clancy issue is incredibly rare. I mean, these are really 1 in a million side effects. And so really the advice I would give is the general advice I'd give to anyone who is just having depression. Normally, it's like, where is this coming from? One, it's going to be hormonal for the first year after you give birth. There's a lot of hormonal fluctuations going on, and you kind of just have to ride that out, really. And then you want to look at, what I think are, four major areas for mood. So it's relationships. Do you have the right support from your spouse or your family or your friends? What can you do to bolster that up? And then there is meaning and purpose, and whether that's through, faith, religion, meaning and purpose you're finding, with your children. This can be really hard, especially for working moms. I know this personally. My wife really struggled with stepping aside from her career. And some of that just takes time to grieve and just be like, how am I going to work and look after my kids? There's like some really practical conversations you have to have around that if you struggle there. There's sobriety. So I feel like a lot of the time we can often, we're smoking cannabis or we're, using nicotine products or caffeine, and we're just putting things in our body that we shouldn't be putting in our body. That's really important to look at. And then a lot of like the lifestyle things. Now, so much, I want to be sympathetic here. This stuff is all really hard, like especially if you're living in isolation. It's just like you and your husband looking after the kids. If I say things like, get out for morning sunlight, make sure you walk during the day, try and move your body. I mean, those things are all important, but I also know that it's hard to find the time to do that. And so you may need to bring in family and parents to kind of support you there. But they are generally like the major areas that if you can work on them, oftentimes a lot of the other things will improve. And if those things don't work, by all means, you can try a medication to get you through this rough patch, but bring along a parent, bring along a spouse, make sure someone is watching your mood, have them come to the visits with you. And if you start getting worse, then it's like, okay, we're going to pull the plug on that. We're not going to do that anymore. And so I would look at medications as kind of this, always like a second line after you've tried the non-drug approaches first.
It sounds like you're saying that the postpartum depression or, God forbid, psychosis is not so much a consequence today of not being medicated. It's more of a consequence of other factors, including not having family support.
That's exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying we shouldn't have a very narrow view on postpartum depression, and the extreme form of postpartum depression is psychosis, right? I think we run into a lot of problems with postpartum depression, major depressive disorder, any psychiatric condition when we just seed and just say, it's just genetic. This is just genetic medical problems and we just need to use the drugs for them. We know that is not true. We know the non-drug approaches can be just as effective as well. And so I want this to feel empowering. I want it to feel like we've spent millennia getting through these without drugs, with support and different help from people, and those things still work. And so yes, that's exactly what I'm trying to say. Let's get out of this narrow view and look after people holistically.
For family members listening who have, a loved mom in their life that maybe is recently postpartum, what are the warning signs that they should be looking out for that mother to indicate that, hey, something's wrong, they need extra support?
So, obviously if they start saying they're feeling suicidal, or they start to have scary, morbid thoughts, I think that's important to ask about. A good way, hey, are you having any scary thoughts? Are you having any thoughts that seem really unusual and out of character for you? And if they're like, yeah, I'm starting to feel like it would be a lot easier if I'm not here. I'm starting to feel like it'd be a lot easier if the kids aren't here. Okay, well, what does that mean? You kind of have to lean into that. And so you can get some very strong things, and then you want to be reassuring about anything that you hear. Okay, well, that must be really frightening to hear that. Don't worry, we're gonna make sure that we get you help. And if they need to go to a residential place, where they can just have supervision. So this doesn't have to be some grimy like county hospital for 2 weeks where you're with people with meth psychosis and things like that. There are nice residential facilities that are covered by insurance where you can go for 2 to 4 weeks, and you just get a break, and you can be watched. And so I would introduce it in that way. But the softer signs are things like, and this turned up in the Lindsay Clancy case, they start talking about her becoming, and she's on the meds, really blunted as well. Blunting is important to understand because that your emotions can actually be kind of protective. When people start thinking about suicide or violent behavior, usually the thing that prevents them are the consequences. Well, if I took my life, what would this do to my daughter? What would this do to my mom? If I did this, what are the consequences of that? If you have someone who's really blunted and they're on a lot of medications, sometimes they lose that. I mean, they lose that voice that says, well, this is the impact it would have. It would absolutely destroy everyone. So blunting can be a warning sign. Tearfulness, withdrawing from people, those things. I mean, those if they're having those signs, it's time to start softly asking about self-harm and frightening thoughts is how I would phrase that. Yeah.
One of the things that you do at Taper Clinic is you actually are helping people get off some of these exact drugs, some of the ones that Lindsay Clancy was on. That's what you're doing. What does the process look like when it's done right? You've mentioned residential facilities and, things like that. Is it always that expensive and complicated, or what can a proper taper look like?
So it starts with diagnosis. It's, why did you get on these medications to begin with? A lot of people are on psychiatric medications for totally legitimate reasons, and they may even be helping them. And so, if you start to remove the drug without understanding that first, then you just put them right back in the same place that they were before, and they struggle. So it can be really straightforward if it's like, I got on this during a divorce and now my life is great. You don't really have to do much. You just have to do a gradual patient-led taper. And oftentimes that happens over, 9 months to sometimes up to 2 years, depending on how sensitive they are to it. And you just follow their lead, gradually reducing it down. But we also get a lot of complicated cases where, someone will come to us and they're overweight, and we say, okay, well, so you're using food to deal with your emotions. Well, what's actually behind those emotions? Okay, you have a really unhealthy lifestyle. You don't move. You don't exercise. You spend all your time indoors. There's maybe some relationship problems, and then we try and just foster just like an understanding about how do we get you living more in line with how our bodies are designed to be, and then we can improve that. There can be relationship problems going on. There can be people who are unhappy with the work that they're doing. We need to talk to them about that. So it's a whole manner of just, how did you end up on this medication? How can we address that? And then we address those problems while we bring the drug down, and that can be, and that's how it's done.
If you could say one thing directly to Patrick Clancy, what would you say to him?
I think he's a hero, and I think he's really brave. And um, I don't know how he's managed to be so strong through all of this. And I think a lot of people could very easily have turned on their wife and just said, "See you later." But the fact that he's here fighting for what's right after everything that happened to him, I think makes him just an incredible person. Yeah.
Yeah, my heart just goes out to him and the whole extended family. I mean, it is the most devastating thing that, is really can be almost imagined. Do you think that, this trial, if it's found that Lindsay's not guilty by, reason of insanity, what changes should be happening tomorrow in our medical system?
I think it's already happening. This case is all over the place. Everyone is talking about it. Like, I wish this never went to trial, because I think the prosecution should have just said, there's enough suffering here. This doesn't look like something that we want to pursue. But the fact that they've done it now, I think, has highlighted to a lot of Americans that these drugs can make people worse. And so I think a lot of the people listening just have that added awareness. If things are going badly on the drugs, don't just keep on throwing more drugs after it. A spaghetti at the wall approach with these medications can really lead to tragic consequences. I think doctors are kind of wising up to that as well, because no one wants to end up in a criminal trial, like many of the doctors are now. And so I actually think the impact's already been had right now. I think people are going to be a lot more cautious about using medications so freely. And I think that's a very good thing.
What responsibility do you think the prescribing doctors should have, even if they did not intend harm here?
That's a really hard question for me, because I have a lot of sympathy for these doctors, because they are practicing in a way that they were trained to practice. Um, Many doctors are not aware, we don't receive a lot of education on identifying side effects, and the problems that these medications can have. And that's essentially because the pharmaceutical industry has really controlled the narrative about the drugs. They've bought a lot of the academics, and all you hear nowadays is depression is genetic and the medications help, and you're essentially just trained to use these medications. And so I look at Dr. Tufts. Dr. Tufts, the main psychiatrist in this case, she was like in her first year out of residency. She was practicing the way that she was trained. And I think she got it wrong. I think she missed the diagnosis. I do think the amitriptyline is the thing that pushed her over the edge. And so it's very, it's one of those, but for the grace of God,